Pody's pets and animal companions often become the team's mascots, the center of attention, and though cuteness needs no introduction. Should a GM ever attempt to strike down something this precious, then may that GM forever rot in the Nine Hells, Abaddon, or take your pick of hellish mythos. I should know, I've been that bastard. But it is the quickest way to unite your team under a common cause. Use that knowledge responsibly.
He's out of line, but he's right.
So let's explore bringing a cinematic element to our interactions with animal kin. Before we jump in, it's hard to talk about our pals, mascots, and bestial adversaries without first discussing the skills that our experiences funnel through, like D&D's animal handling and Pathfinder's nature. They are both wisdom-based skills, which means the primal classes get an edge. A ranger being an animal person makes perfect sense, but when it comes to dealing with more sentient beings, we often see charisma-based skills being employed. Diplomacy, persuasion, intimidation, and even performance. Charisma-based characters become the face of the party because they have so many skills when it comes to dealing with people. Why do our animal friends get the short stick? Let's get the obvious stuff out of the way. While these skills are accessible to everyone, it's the skills-based stat that helps provide class specialization and to build a unique identity around that class. They are mechanics that help differentiate a player's experience and their likely contributions to the group. Now, I never want to undermine any class abilities, nor do I want to throw out the rules, but we're storytellers. We can play fast and loose and still honor our players' choices. Do you have a party full of bards that took wisdom as their dump stats? Well, the saving throws are going to suck.
Can't believe I fell for it again.
But all those skills can still apply to animal kin. Every situation is different, and there are so many ways to interpret the proper skill checks for our actions in game, but it often boils down to understanding and the capacity to understand. Let me explain by giving you an example. In the Lord of the Rings movie, The Two Towers, we see Aragorn calm a bucking horse named Brago by speaking Sindarin, Tolkien's Elvish, to him. At least, that's what Eowyn believes, that it is due to Elvish magic.
I've heard of the magic of elves, but did not look for it in a ranger from the north.
But it's not. Aragorn's positioning, his demeanor, and his words create an invitation for Brago to calm. Is this animal handling? Yes, but it is also persuasion. Both the body and the spoken language are understood. Aragorn establishes a genuine connection with Brago by asking about his experience and having him released. In these acts, he shows Brago that he sees him not as a tool, but as an individual. This is the same methodology that we see used with people. And it is this act of kindness that unfolds into Brago saving Aragorn's life later in the story. The Lord of the Rings movie trilogy is actually full of memorable animal NPCs, even those with brief appearances. While trapped atop the Tower of Orthanc, Gandalf captures a passing moth and whispers to it. It's mostly incomprehensible, but we do hear the name Gwaihir, and it's later that Gwaihir, the Lord of the Eagles, saves Gandalf. And it's thanks to this cute little moth. This passing side character was so integral to the plot, and it had seconds of screen time. This moth is so damn interesting. It listened to Gandalf in a language that it clearly understood, and then went out and sought out not just a giant eagle, but the lord of them. Keep in mind that birds, regular ones, are the natural predators of moths. Even if Gandalf told the moth what to do and what to communicate, this moth is a badass. What distance did it fly? How did it recognize Gwaihir? Did it just announce itself when it got there? And how? Seconds of screen time. So many questions. This is perfect inspiration for our games. We can have NPCs for one scene in one session, and with the right drop of lore, their presence can be felt throughout the rest of the campaign.
Time, like hope, is an illusion.
As the audience for the movie, we got to see the moth. But if this were in session, perhaps the players hear a tale of an incredible messenger. Its reputation grows with every description of its deeds. Perhaps the party choose to seek this messenger out, as it was the last character to interact with an important NPC that has now gone missing. Eventually, they track the messenger down, only to discover that it is a tiny moth that has died in its ripe old age of 6 months. Happily, I might add. Now, perhaps there are further clues, perhaps not, but the mere mention of this messenger's tale was enough to create a whole new storyline for the players to experience. Sprinkling in those interesting facts in interactions, even with NPCs that were just made on the spot, helps remind the players that the character they are speaking to has a life outside of this singular moment. One of the more common examples of this is when the party searches the pockets of a bandit that they just slayed. Only to find some sort of sobering note that might read, "I know your work is important, Papa, but please come home soon. Mommy and I miss you terribly. You can be my birthday present." I do love reminding the players that sometimes they're not always the good guys.
Are we the baddies?
Adding these character flares to NPCs is important, not just for the humanoid, the monstrous, the alien, but especially for the animal kin, who by system design, depending on what you play, run the risk of mechanically simpler interactions, which can easily slip into a less impactful experience. Now, there's a way to bridge this gap that we've been talking about, and to do so canonically without bending the rules, by using Speak with Animals and other similar spells. This establishes that common understanding that I spoke about earlier. You and the animal can communicate in the same language. Without straying from the source material, we can now apply all the same skills that you use with people. But doesn't that create another problem?
I was hoping you'd cry out in your sleep. Then I would have bitten your head off.
Now that you can freely communicate with this animal, now that you're using your people skills, does animal handling still apply in this conversation? Let's do a thought experiment here. Let's argue that the animal you're interacting with has a lower intelligence, so even though that they are able to speak, they are unable to understand the nuance of that speech. Therefore, there is no need for your charisma skills, as animal handling will do just fine. But what if we switch this animal with another? In fact, let's change the species entirely. Perhaps you are now interacting with an elven infant. They have even less speech capacity than the beast you were just speaking to through magic. Instead, you now must communicate through tone and touch and faces. If we translated this to a skill check, is that not more like animal handling than persuasion? As storytellers, sometimes we need to ask hard questions and challenge the structure that lays before us. I love bending the rules, but I'll also enforce them as needed. Brennan Lee Mulligan of Dimension 20 does a fantastic job handling this dichotomy. One thing I've learned by watching him over the years is the power of the rule of cool. Players try to break the game all the time. Cantrips are not high-level spells, for example. No, you cannot use prestidigitation to make a nuke. But under the right circumstances, indulging in this chaos is very fun for the table and empowering. This is always a fun alternative rule to keep in mind, especially when running animal encounters. The party will get up to so many shenanigans, especially when their opponents are adorable.
He's so cute and all alone! Can we keep him?
Let me leave you with an anecdote from my last campaign. The party was visiting a mountainside village of friendly goblins. These goblins had recently moved out of a nearby cave complex where the primary livestock were blind quails that they called ground pigeons. So Heka, the party druid, unbeknownst to the goblins, wild-shaped into a small lizard local to the area, jumped upon the back of one of these quail and rode it like a bull in a rodeo. This spark of chaos not only dominated the session, but it became a thing. Afterwards, the goblins started gathering the local lizards and placing them upon the back of their domesticated ground pigeons to try to recreate the event that they had witnessed. Eventually, this actually developed into a sport. In fact, in the epilogue of the campaign, the druid returned to awaken the lizards to create true miniature jockeys. But in the beginning, let's just say the mortality rate of the mounts and the riders was very high. So until next time, keep that imagination active and enjoy gaming.